Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sinan. Welcome to Jesus in Islam. Today, I will be introducing Dr. Dorothy Buck to you. Hope all is well at a time like this, and especially if you're in New England. Without expecting, we got some snow. So I would like to welcome everyone. And like I said, I will introduce Dr. Dorothy Buck. And without taking much of your time, Dr. Dorothy Buck's own spiritual quest led her from many years as a classical ballet performer and a teacher to Carmelite spirituality. After writing The Dance of Life, published in 1987 by Paragon House in New York City, her interest in spirituality and psychology led to a PhD in religion and literature from Boston University and a Master of Arts from Emmanuel College. With further training at Boston Institute for Psychotherapy, she has a private practice as a licensed mental health practitioner and a pastoral counselor in Davis Square in Somerville, Massachusetts. Her interest in three Abrahamic traditions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, led her to publish many articles and books on interfaith topics and to establish a network of prayer groups, such as the modern revival of Bidalia, along with chapters in two other books. Her articles have appeared in Dance Magazine, Living Prayer, Sufi, and Journal of Sufism. The Quest and the National Catholic Reporter. She has two books on the legacy of Masugnim, Dialogues with Saints and Mystics in the Spirit of Louis Massignon, published by KMP Publications in 2002. And Louis Massignon, a pioneer in interfaith dialogue, the Badalia Prayer Movement from 1947 to 1962, published by Blue Dome Press in 2016. And like I mentioned, don't want to take much of your time because Dr. Dorothy Buck will be giving many useful information tonight. And I would like to introduce Dr. Dorothy Buck in your honor. Doctor, please.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see I guess I'll just start. Okay. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us this evening for this lecture offered by the Peace Islands Institute. The Peace Islands Institute is a movement in the Muslim community dedicated to world peace by promoting interfaith dialogue among all religious faith traditions and intercultural relationships through education and cultural exchange. I have been facilitating a monthly Christian and Muslim faith-sharing gathering with members of the Peace Islands Institute for many years. Inspired by the pioneering efforts in Muslim and Christian relations by the well-known French scholar and spiritual seeker Louis Massignon, the Bedelia USA was established in 2002 to encourage Christians and Muslims to share and thereby enhance their own faith experience and educate one another about their traditions. Today, we are looking forward to being enriched by this lecture offered by Professor Zeki Saritoprak, who is currently a professor and prestigious chair in Islamic studies in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at John Carroll University. He specializes in the field of Islamic theology, which is the study of what both Muslims and Christians call the end times, or the afterlife, known in both traditions as eschatology. The role of Jesus in Islamic eschatology is the subject of his book, Islam's Jesus, and is the subject of his lecture today. There will be time to address your questions at the end of the lecture. Please welcome Professor Saritoprak.
Thank you, Professor Dorothy, and thank you, Peace Islands. And I see on the flyer there are many supporters, sponsors, so thank you all. As Professor Dorothy mentioned, my topic is Jesus in Islam, and I will elaborate on the eschatological role of Jesus in Islam. Before that, I will say a few words about the essential place of Jesus in Islam, how Jesus is presented in the Quran, how the Prophet speaks of Jesus. So briefly, I will elaborate on that. Before I share my screen with you, because I have a PowerPoint and I like to be precise as much as I can. As we know, recently some events happened in France. Unfortunately, some violent events happened. We strongly condemn those violent events perpetrated by some extremist Muslims. Islam is not related to those type of extremism. And also we strongly suggest that Muslims be patient with regard to provocation of some political leaders about the Prophet of Islam. Actually, I say the Prophet of Islam is like the light of the sun. You cannot extinguish it by just saying few words. So Muslims shouldn't be afraid that, oh, okay, Islam has gone, because some people made some bad things about it. No. Basically, we should be patient. We should be peaceful. That's what Islam suggests. As Muslims, we should not be basically provoked by some statements of some politicians. We should stick to the pristine teaching of the religion of Islam. And in Islam, it's so important that if a person does one thing, that person is accountable for that thing, not other people. So you cannot transgress to the rights of innocence. And therefore, what happened at the church in France, that is totally against the Islamic teaching, and we strongly condemn that. So that was a very important statement I like to make, because Professor Dorothy studies mostly on Louis Massignon, and Louis Massignon is a French scholar who encountered Islam and who loved Islam greatly. So I hope that he will be an inspiration, in France, being originally from France, in the occasion of these negative things going on in France, and will bring peace to the people in France and to the other place in the world. And actually, it's the topic of my talk also, how peace can be achieved. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so Jesus in Islam, or Islam's Jesus, this is the title of my book, actually, Islam's Jesus, the Jesus of Islam. So who was Jesus? Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. In the Islamic teaching, Jesus does not have a physical father. His birth is miracle. The birth of Jesus is miracle. And I think the two religions that are agreement on this would be Islam and Christianity. There are different approaches, but with regard to the miraculous birth of Jesus, the Quran is very clear. It says it was through the power of God, and sending angel to Mary and informing her about a pure son that she will be given. He is bringer of peace. Jesus is bringer of peace. He will bring peace. When he comes back. How he will come back. So it's so complicated to a certain extent when you look at some religious texts, but I found some ways to interpret it. So he will bring peace, but how this can happen, I will explain it. And he is also one of the 5 elite prophets in Islam, along with Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. So there are many prophets of God. Actually, one hadith of the prophet. Hadith, as you know, is the statement of the prophet. One hadith says there are 124,000 prophets came before Islam. And all of them are true prophets of God. Muslims believe in all of them. Some of them are mentioned in the Quran by name. Some of them are not mentioned by name. So among these, there are 5 elite prophets, the highest of all of them, the highest of all. And they are also known as Ulul Azm, which means the possessors of steadfastness. And these are Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon them. And therefore, just last Wednesday was the birthday of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And then few weeks from now, there will be the birth date of Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him. So in Islam, if you love Jesus, you love Muhammad. If you love Muhammad, you love Jesus. They are so much connected to each other. And therefore, for a Muslim, because, excuse me, because this is a part of Islamic faith and a part of one of the articles of faith, you cannot be a Muslim if you don't believe in Jesus. Because he is one of the messengers of God mentioned in the Quran, and therefore you have to believe that Jesus is the messenger of God. It's so powerful in the Islamic teaching. And as I said, unfortunately, modern day, our mind is so much occupied by political situations. We think that Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, are like in 2 opposite parties. That is not the case. They are not opposite. They are having the same light. And therefore, Jesus and the Prophet are actually both the messenger of Allah, the messenger of God. And they bring the same message. The only change happens according to the condition of the time. So just I like to emphasize that because it is so important, because there are so many misunderstandings about this. One important aspect with regard to Jesus in Islam, he is also a Muslim. You realize that I put with lowercase m, that means he has submitted himself to the will of God. That's the meaning of Muslim, the meaning of being a Muslim. With lowercase m, Adam was a Muslim, Noah was a Muslim, Moses was a Muslim, Jesus was a Muslim, Muhammad was a Muslim. They submitted themselves to the will of God. So that's the meaning of being a Muslim. To have with capital M, of course, there will be the one who follows the religion of Islam. It is significant to note that lowercase is very important, because you might be a Muslim with uppercase M and unfortunately not a Muslim with lowercase m. That means you are not a Muslim, because Islam is not a lip service. Islam is not just saying a few words. Islam is something in heart. And if you don't have that faith in your heart, even your name is a Muslim, you are not a Muslim. That's a very significant principle in Islam. And that's why to be Muslim, that means to be submitting yourself to the will of God. That is the meaning of being a Muslim. He is a miracle worker. I will mention some of them. He was able to show miracles. How he would do that? In the Islamic teaching, as I will mention, through the power of God. God gave him that power to show miracle, to show people that he is speaking on behalf of God. And this is true for other messengers of God. Moses had miracles. The Quran speaks of his miracles. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, had miracles. So God supports his prophets, his messengers with miracles to show that they are speaking on behalf of God. They are not speaking in vain. He is also an intercessor on the day of judgment. There is a verse in the Quran, in Ayatul Kursi, which is the greatest verse in the Quran. It's according to some narrations, it is also containing the greatest name of Allah. It says that no one can intercede except those who will be receiving permission from Allah. So it is believed that prophets of God, messengers of God, will have ability to intercede and to ask Allah to forgive some people, and God will not reject their request because they are beloved by God. So Jesus, in basic Islamic sources, the Quran, as we know, the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, and the Hadith. The Hadith is a term used for the sayings of the Prophet of Islam. Muslims spend a lot of time on the collections of the sayings of the Prophet and scrutinized and evaluated them. Some of them were fabricated. Muslim scholars have separated them as fabricated, and those who were sound, they categorize them as the sound hadith. So there is a huge knowledge, a huge discipline in Islamic sciences about hadith. Is independent discipline among Islamic scholars, Islamic sciences, or Islamic humanities, if you wish. So he is mentioned in the Quran, Jesus, about 90 verses, over 90 times, because in some verses he is mentioned twice. And generally, because he is mentioned so much in the Quran, he is important then. He is, maybe the second most important personality that is mentioned in the Quran after Moses by name. Moses, I think, is about 140 times. I wrote an article on him, published in a journal in Germany. I found that he is perhaps the greatest, the most frequently mentioned personality in the Quran. Jesus perhaps is the second one. That needs perhaps a thorough study on this. He is characterized by his message, and that is the gospel, Injil. The gospel is the Quranic name for the gospel is Injil. It is in the Quran. Most probably it is Syriac or Aramaic language, and it means the good news, again, like the gospel. One of the miracles of Jesus, Jesus says, "Surely I came to you with sign from your Lord. I create from clay the likeness of a bird. Then I breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by God's permission." It becomes a bird. There is a clay, and Jesus makes the shape of a bird from this clay, and he breathes into it, and it becomes a living bird. That is a miracle. So no one can do that, unless that person is supported by the divine power. And Jesus says, "You see, I am doing this." So this is a sign that I am speaking on behalf of my Lord. So this is miracle. Sometimes I say, if you like, try it. Can you do that? You cannot do that. So it's not normal. It is unnatural. It's actually beyond nature. So God changes the laws of nature for his messengers. For that moment, the laws of nature changes, because naturally you breathe into a clay and it doesn't become a bird. It's not natural. And also another Quranic verse, Jesus speaks in this verse, in another verse also, he speaks that he confirms the Torah. He does not reject the Torah. He confirms the message of the Torah. And he says, and I have come confirming that which was before me of the Torah, and to make lawful to you part of what was forbidden to you. And I have come to you with a proof from your Lord. A proof from your Lord. Islamic scholars believe this proof is his message, the gospel, and also his miracles. All are proving that he was speaking on behalf of God. So then he says, the verse continues. So fear God and obey me and worship, the verse continues, and worship God, my Lord and your Lord. So Jesus suggests that only God to be worshipped, and worship God only, my Lord and your Lord. In Islam, you are not allowed to worship anything other than Allah, other than God, the creator of heavens and earth. Yes, you love the prophets of God. For example, in Islam, you have to love the prophets of God. You have to love Muhammad. You have to love Jesus, but you cannot worship them. It is prohibited to worship Muhammad, the messenger of God in Islam. The message, the one who brought Islam to humanity. You cannot worship him. He is a worshiper of God. He is the greatest worshiper of God. Jesus is the greatest worshiper of God. These are the greatest worshiper of God, worshipers of God. Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, all of them. But they are not to be worshipped. They are worshippers of Allah. And therefore, it's very significant in Islam, this idea of oneness of God, and only God is the object of worship. Again, he says, I confirm the Torah. And also, in this verse, he speaks of his new message, and that is gospel, the gospel, Injil. So he speaks of confirming the Torah and receiving a new message. And as I said, like believing in the messengers of Allah, the prophets of God, the messengers of God, as an article of faith, in the same way, belief in the scriptures of God also is an article of faith. So Muslims have to believe in the scriptures of God, not only in the Quran. They have to believe in the Torah. They have to believe in the Psalms. They have to believe in the gospel. These are mentioned by name in the Quran, and therefore these are especially the Torah, the gospel, and the Psalms are pre-Islamic revelations, and Muslims have to believe in them. Of course, there is one subtle issue in the Islamic teaching that, for example, the translation of the Quran is not the Quran. The original format of it is the Quran. The translation of the Torah is not the Torah. The original format of it is the Torah. The translation of the gospel is not the gospel. The original format is the gospel. Yes, they transmit the meaning of these texts, but the original one is the one that is the word of God. And that's why Muslims are making distinction between the translation and the original one. For example, in prayer, you have to read the original one. It's a requirement in the Islamic teaching. This verse is about the disciples of Jesus. Actually, the Quran praises the disciples of Jesus. Jesus asks, who are my helpers in God's cause? And the disciples respond and say, we are your helpers in the cause of God. And the Quran says to Muslims, O Muslims, be like the disciples of Jesus. When Jesus asked, who are my helpers in the cause of God? They said, we are your helpers in the cause of God. So be like them. Follow the path that the path that they had. Follow that path. And that is when the messenger of Allah says, are you going to help me? Help him. That's the idea. The Quran speaks of Jesus as a predecessor of the Prophet of Islam. And now coming to the main topic. We have time, I think, a little bit.
Yes.
So the main topic that I like to elaborate is the eschatological role of Jesus. This is mentioned in many Islamic texts. In fact, one of the early texts in Islam by Abu Hanifa, very famous Muslim jurist and theologian, when he lists the things that Muslims have to believe in. So, for example, we believe in the oneness of God. We believe in the prophets of God. We believe in this, in this, in this. And then one of them says, we believe in the coming of Jesus. Muslims generally don't use the word coming, the descent of Jesus, which is the Arabic word nuzul. We believe in the descent of Jesus. Jesus will come and will bring peace and justice. It's like an important element of Islamic faith. And that's why I elaborate on this, because I'm a theologian, a Muslim theologian. As a Muslim theologian, I said, I have to elaborate on this. What is the meaning of the coming of Jesus? Is a person going to come from sky? How this can happen? It's very challenging. So when I studied this subject, I have to confess that I didn't know that there were so many references, so many books written on this subject. And I realized, I think I found more than 100 books written on the descent of Jesus in the Islamic teaching. So I categorized them into three categories. One, I call it the modernist approach. And the other one I call the literalist approach, and then the interpretive approach. The modernist approach, mostly the idea of some Muslim philosophers, contemporary philosophers. They say that this is something really influenced by Christian texts or Messianic Jewish texts, and it is not Islamic. It's not in Islam. How about this hadith? They say all these hadith are not sound, are not hadith. Well, that there are many hadith. I think I found more than 100 hadith. One Indian Islamic scholar put all hadith together. His name is Al-Kashmiri. Wrote his book, very encompassing book about those hadith, just compiling the hadith. He doesn't give too much interpretation. The second group, what is the percentage of this group? I would say maybe about 3% of the literature on the descent of Jesus. So it's not very large literature, not very large percentage, but it is there. There are some Muslim scholars, Muslim philosophers. The second group, I call it literalist approach. This group look at the text in a literal sense. They say he will come directly from sky because the prophet said this, and there is no way to interpret. They take it literally. So I remember once I asked one of the literalist Muslims, so do you think that Jesus will come from sky with parachute? Is it possible that a person will come, Jesus will come from sky, everybody will see him? And he said, I don't know about parachute, but I know that he will come from sky directly. Everybody will see him coming, a person coming from sky. Well, I said, I don't know. That's actually not my approach. I am studying Islamic theology. My favorite approach, my favorite one is the interpretive approach. The interpretive approach does not deny the hadith as the modernist approach, but they say this hadith should be understood in an allegorical way, not in a literal way. Allegorical way, figurative way. So they say, yes, the prophet said this, it is true, and Jesus will come, it is true, but it is not the way that literals approach understanding. And they give some understanding. I will elaborate on this dimension. Is it mentioned in the Quran, the descent of Jesus, the coming of Jesus? It is basically accepted by Muslim scholars, theologians, that there is no direct reference to the coming of Jesus, with exception of this verse. Some have said this verse might be a direct reference, although this is also interpreted in another way. But generally, there is a consensus that there is no direct reference to the descent of Jesus in the Quran. In the Hadith, there are many, but in the Quran, there are some hints, and that's why even hints are important. Muslim commentators of the Quran, when they interpret these Quranic verses, they speak of the descent of Jesus or the coming of Jesus at the end of time. So this is one verse that is considered as a hint about the coming of Jesus. Jesus, will speak to humanity from his cradle and in manhood, and he is of the righteous. Now, one aspect of the miracles of Jesus, which is, I asked some Christian colleagues, and Professor Dorothy, you might know, there is no mention of this miracle of Jesus in canonical Gospels, that Jesus spoke from his cradle. In the Quran, it's very clear. It says, when Mary was pregnant, miraculously, she became pregnant, and God inspired her, revealed to her that when she take her baby to her people, she should not speak. And she did, based on this divine inspiration. She took her baby to her people after birth. I look at some Islamic commentators, some commentaries of the Quran. They say Jesus was 11 days old at that moment of when this miracle happened. And they say, Mary, where did you get this baby? You are not married. Your father was not a bad person. Your mother was not an evil person. Where did you get this baby? So accusing her of committing adultery. And Mary, based on this Quranic, based on this divine revelation, as the Quran speaks of, doesn't speak. She just points at the baby, as if she says, don't ask me, ask the baby. I don't know, ask the baby. Interestingly, the Quran gives details about this conversation between Mary and her people. And at this moment, Jesus speaks from his cradle. Because they say, how can we talk to a baby who is in his cradle? And Jesus speaks. And he says, very powerful statement in the Quran. I am the servant of Allah. I am the servant of God. Inni Abdullah, Atani al-Kitab, gave me the book. Gave me the book. Muslim commentators are saying that why Jesus used past tense, because he will receive the book. And they have an Arabic rule of eloquence saying that if the future event is so certain, past tense can be used for future event. And the receiving of this divine revelation was so certain for Jesus that he used even past tense, the highest level of eloquence of Arabic language. And then he continues, he says, he made me a prophet, a messenger for him. And peace be upon him when I was born, peace be upon him when I die, peace be upon him when I will be resurrected. Peace be upon me, Jesus says. Peace be upon me when I was born, peace be upon me when I die, and peace be upon me when I am resurrected. And God commanded me to pray to give charity, and to be kind to my mother. So this way, Jesus declared the innocence of his mother. And the Quran doesn't give further information, but apparently there was certain level of convincing that Mary was not, kind of person that they expected or they accused. At least because otherwise she would be stoned according to the rules of the religious rules of the time. There is another Quranic verse, and surely Jesus is a sign for the hour. These scholars who have interpreted this verse, they suggest that the sign of the hour means his coming is the sign of the hour. Another group of scholars suggesting that his birth was the sign of the hour. That means the God who is so powerful that brings Jesus without a physical father is able to bring the afterlife, bring the hour. So that is the meaning of being the sign of the hour. That's why some Islamic scholars are saying this is a sign of a hint in the Quran. Some are saying, no, this is actually not a hint. This is a direct reference to the coming of Jesus. And in Hadith, there are many Hadith. As I said, I found more than 100 Hadith. Just one of these Hadith, Prophet clearly says, and this is in Al-Bukhari, the most reliable Hadith source in the Islamic tradition. The Prophet says, by God Almighty, in whose hand my soul is, which is very powerful statement in the Arabic language. When you like to make sure about something, you use this phrase. By whom, in whose hand my soul is. Jesus, the son of Mary, will soon descend among you Muslims as a just ruler. He will come. And what's his message? Justice. He will bring justice. The Prophet clearly says this. He will come and will bring justice. He will descend and will bring justice. So the main aspect of the coming of Jesus is the fulfillment of justice, basically, because that's the purpose that the Hadith mentions. In another Hadith, the Prophet describes the features of Jesus. It has been shown to me while I was sleeping in my dream, while I was circumambulating the Kaaba, the holy shrine of Islam, I saw a man of brown color, the best one can see among brown colored human beings. And then the Hadith continues, and he says he was so clean. He was so clean, as if he was coming from a shower and water was dropping from his head to indicate the levels of the cleanliness of Jesus. And he said, I asked, who is this? And they said, this is Jesus, the son of Mary. And the Prophet describes Jesus, two aspects. One is his color, the color of his skin, and then the second, his cleanliness. Very, very beautifully explained, in the Hadith and described. So in America, what's the color of Jesus? I think generally, when I ask my colleagues, we have an agreement that Jesus in America is pure white. But this Hadith actually says he was of brown color, which makes better sense. Being in the Middle East area, in the area of modern day Israel, Palestine, Jordan area, brown color much makes sense, makes better sense. Another hadith of the Prophet, again about his coming, his eschatological coming. Surely Jesus, the Messiah, will find some people from among my community as his helpers. So when he comes, some Muslims will be his helpers. Very, very powerful hadith. And actually the hadith continues, and he says, kind of good hope, actually. He says, a community that is, I am the beginning and Jesus the end, will never perish, will never be perished. And that is kind of good hope, giving a good, a great hope to Muslims that even there will be some difficult times, but there will be no total annihilation, because the beginning is Muhammad and the end is Jesus. The Prophet says, Prophet of Islam. In the Sufi literature, there is a great literature on Jesus, especially in Rumi, and in some other scholars, like Sha'rani also has a good reference to Jesus and his descent. I will refer this section to my book. You can read the book if you have time. It's called Islam's Jesus. Actually, the cover of the book was on the flyer. But I like to go to contemporary scholars' interpretation about the interpretive approach. Some Islamic scholars use this teaching of love that is known as essential element of the message of Jesus. One of them is Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. He says, today's Muslims should make this as a principle: to love, love, and to hate, hatred. To love, love. If you love, love, love will increase. If you hate, hatred, hatred will decrease. And he says, actually, there is nothing deserves hatred more than hatred itself. So if you like to hate, hate hatred, fulfill that desire of hate by hating hatred. That's Nursi's approach. The interpretive approach, I will also talk about Nursi's approach from the idea of interpretive perspective. Muhammad Abdu is one of the scholars that I found very interesting with this regard. He's an Egyptian Islamic scholar. He wrote many, many books. One of the greatest modernist actually. He's also a modernist theologian, not philosopher that I mentioned, but theologian. Muhammad Abdu, he says, I translated from Arabic, from his book, the descent of Jesus and his ruling on earth can be interpreted as the dominance of his spirit and his enigmatic message to people. This is what dominates Jesus' teaching of commanding mercy, love, and peace. So based on Muhammad Abdu's teaching, if a person works for mercy, love, and peace, that person actually is fulfilling the coming of Jesus, is on the side of Jesus, as if Jesus has come and that person is supporting Jesus. Be Muslims, Christians, those who believe in the coming of Jesus. So basically he says, these are the essential element of his message. If you work for this, you are on the right direction. Mercy, love, and peace. That is the coming of his coming. That is the meaning of his coming. Muhammad Hamdi Yazır, a Turkish Islamic theologian and the commentator of the Quran, a prominent commentator of the Quran, he has also a good interpretation. I translated his interpretation from Turkish into English, and I have an appendix thoroughly translating his section on Jesus. So I will also refer to that because of the interest of time. Now I like to focus on Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. Bediüzzaman Said Nursi is a very prominent Islamic scholar of the 20th century. He was born in 1886 and died in 1960. So he was a contemporary Islamic scholar. A little bit after Muhammad Abduh, but it seems like in a period of time Muhammad Abduh was alive, because Muhammad Abduh died in 1904. So he says that the coming of Jesus is basically to be understood as dialogue between Muslims and Christians to bring justice and peace to our world. When he speaks of the coming of Jesus, he speaks of dialogue between Muslims and Christians. In his other book, when he speaks of Muslims' respect for the people of the book, because the Quran says that, he includes Muslims, Christians, and Jews as the people of the book. So dialogue between Muslims, Christians, and Jews will be contributing to the peace in the world. He says a renewal of Christianity and a return to the original message of Jesus will contribute to this dialogue. Will make Christians much more open to Muslims, to Jews, and Jews and Christians will be much more open to Muslims. This way, they will have a dialogue, and they will actually, in one sense, he says, they will make alliance to bring peace to the world. And I calculated briefly the population of Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the world. They constitute about 58% of world population. It's a big number. It's a huge population. If they come together, they can make peace in the world. And I think that makes great sense. And Nursi's approach is very important, especially in modern days. Is this compatible with the original teaching of Islam? This verse is actually showing that. Say, O Muhammad, this, O people of the book, come to a common word between us, that all of us worship none but God. Let's come together. And people of the book is a title, and very positive title, for Christians and Jews. Unfortunately, these extremist groups don't see these verses. I don't know. They don't see these verses, or they just ignore it. This is invitation 1400 years ago, inviting to a common ground. Let's come together and work for peace. And that was Nursi's approach, that if these people, when I say Abrahamic traditions, Muslims, Abrahamic people, Abrahamic family, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, I don't mean to exclude other traditions. My goal is, when I say this, I mean that these people have very important common ground. When you look at the gospel, you look at the Torah, you look at the Quran, it's very, very, you see many similarities. Recently, my colleague, Jack Miles, wrote a very beautiful in the Quran, and he makes very beautiful comparisons. I really liked his book. It's called God in the Quran. Jack Miles, if you have time, just read that book. You know how the same concepts are beautifully described with different nuances in the Torah, in the Gospel, in the Quran. And when you look at this, you feel very closeness to each other, not very far away from each other. And if these people come together, this bringing of peace in the world will help Hindus, will help Buddhists, will help Taoists, whatever you imagine, members of other religious traditions. And that's why when I say this, I don't mean to exclude other traditions. Diversity is a divine plan. If God willed, he could have made you one community. God didn't want you to make one community. He made you different tribes and societies, so that you benefit from each other, you know each other. In this Quranic verse says, I made you in a different ways, and then the command comes and says, compete with each other for good things. Positive competition. Compete with each other to do good things. And I say, for this competition, there is no loser. In this competition, there is no loser, because all are doing good things and they're contributing to each other. Dialogue in the Quran is very, very powerful. I wrote some articles on this. Actually, if you just Google it, you'll find many of them. One was a social policy towards the people of the book. It was published in the Journal of Christian Islam and Christian Muslim Relations. Several articles on Muslim-Christian relations leading to world peace. So if you have time, you can look at them. And one important section is actually in my book about this. There is an early story in Islam. Maybe I can briefly mention this story, and then I will finish with some important events, pictures that might, help us to understand what's going on and gives us a little bit hope. In the beginning of Islam, when Prophet Muhammad declared his message, there was a huge reaction, very hostile reaction to his message. What he could do. He asked his followers, his new Muslims, new converts, especially marginalized ones, to go to Abyssinia, to migrate to Abyssinia. Because he said, you will be killed one by the elite idol worshippers of Mecca. So in Abyssinia, there is a Christian king, King Najashi in the Islamic history. Najashi or Negus in English. No one is wronged in his land. Go there and you will find peace. About 70 Muslims, 20 female, 50 male, migrated to this land of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. And king welcomed them remarkably. These days, the idea of welcoming strangers, that happened in this early time. And the king, the Christian king, welcomed those strangers. He loved Prophet Muhammad. He sent him messages, and Prophet Muhammad loved him. He responded. So this was my argument with this story, is that since this happened in the beginning of Islam, such a remarkable alliance, remarkable cooperation, remarkable love, that can happen again. And Muslims, Christians, Jews, they can use their common ground and come together and contribute to world peace. So Fethullah Gulen is one of the pioneers of this dialogue. He met with Pope John Paul II in February 1998. For example, I have a quote from him, very beautiful quote. He says, "Close the doors of greed, abhorrence, and hatred. They may be a small seed, but by opening the door, they could grow and become a huge tree of evil." So work for good things, because good things will be like seed of good trees. Bad things will be like the seed of bad things, and then they can grow and become really a tree of evil. And these are some pictures that is really contributing to dialogue with Pope John Paul II, with Patriarch Bartholomew, with Chief Rabbi of Israel. So this, since 1990s, I think maybe the second half of 1990s, he started this dialogue and continuing. He's currently residing as they call it, self-exiled in Pennsylvania. He's contributing greatly, and in the United States also he is still giving this idea of dialogue, inspiring people. There is a movement called Hizmet movement, and this movement is actually active in this dialogue with adherents of other traditions, especially Abrahamic traditions. And that's what gives me a great hope, that there are some people who are actively engaged in dialogue. These are some other pictures. This one I was part of it. Dr. Sayed is a remarkable personality. He is the current director of Islamic Society of North America. He's very active in dialogue with adherents of different traditions, Jews and Christians in particular. He also pioneered in establishing an organization in Washington, D.C. called Shoulder to Shoulder. He is one of those who are contributed to the establishment of the Shoulder to Shoulder. That means these members of religious tradition that come together, have shoulder to shoulder, being allied, being united, which is very important. This is another interfaith dialogue that is, I think it happened in New York. It is including many other traditions, Buddhism and Hinduism as well. This picture is Benedict XVI. You might remember he made an unfortunate comment about Prophet Muhammad, like the comments that currently some people are doing, but his comment was different in a different occasion. He didn't mean that, perhaps, but he actually caused a damage to Muslim-Christian relations. So he thought how to repair that damage. He went to Turkey and he went to a mosque and he prayed together with a mufti of Istanbul. So to a certain extent, he repaired the damage that he caused at that time, and actually was good. Then later, that damage was repaired. And I think that's it. As I said, just these pictures are showing that something good going on in the world. And I will be glad to take your questions if you have any question. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Dr. Zeki. That was very beautiful and very much in line with your book because I've read it. So I realize what's in it. There are a few questions coming in, and the thing that it gets raised very often, I'm not going to repeat those questions. We don't have too much time here. But what they're basically asking, and this is a really important issue, since we are also doing this kind of, we call it faith sharing with our Muslim and Christian friends. And we do a lot of sharing our own experience of our traditions, but we also share the differences, in the Quran and in the Bible and the Torah, the differences in approach, of understanding who Jesus is, including, and someone raised that issue here around the crucifixion, for example, how it's understood in Islam as opposed to how it's understood in Christianity. And it's an important issue here is when you're coming together with Christians and Muslims together to discuss these things, how, in your own experience, do you address the differences, so that people can hear it, can understand it, and simply respect it, without judging it or being threatened by it or concerned about it?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. Two things with this regard. One is, I think we have to acknowledge our differences. That is diversity. That is, people's choice. We have to respect people's choice, regardless. Their choice might not be my choice, and they might have really a good argument for their choice, and that's beautiful. We have to respect each other and acknowledge these differences. I think that is enriching such dialogue. Of course, in a civilized way, in a beautiful way, because the Quran says, address the people of the book in the most beautiful way. The most beautiful way. So that's a Quranic command. Well, there are differences, as you said, with regard to crucifixion of Jesus. I just was talking to one of my Christian colleagues, and he said, well, there is a good similarity, but only the order is different. The order is different, something like that. Because Muslims believe that Jesus did not die, God rescued him to heaven, and then he will come back, and then he will die a natural death, and then he will be in heaven again. Christians believe that he was crucified, he was resurrected, and he went to heaven, and he will be back. Similar things, but with different orders. But regardless, even if they are very much different, for such beautiful result to bring peace to the world, they have to come together and focus on a common ground, because they have so many common ground as well. Mm-hmm. Acknowledge the differences, but focus on common ground. Common ground like the justice, peace, working together, because when you work together, you will be much more stronger. You will be much more effective to fulfill these beautiful messages. And therefore, focusing on common ground, acknowledging the differences, I think will be very ideal. And from my experience, so far when we have meetings, we talked about differences. Some Muslims are wondering, for example, what is the Christian approach to that? And a Christian scholar will explain to them. And some Christians some Jewish are wondering, what is the Islamic approach to that? And a Muslim scholar will explain what is the Islamic approach. So we are learning. And I think that is very much compatible with the Quranic teaching when it says, we have created you in different tribes, in different groups, so that you know each other. Right. When you come together, you know each other. And when you know each other, you will decrease the level of hatred. Because when you know someone, you have better knowledge and you actually feel better about that person. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this concept of coming together for the betterment of society and this dialogue should continue. And regardless of the differences, we should acknowledge our differences, not to ignore our differences. That will be really superficial, to ignore our differences. There are differences, definitely there are differences, and we should acknowledge that.
Good. I'm going to ask you another one. Okay, just one more. People are asking more specific things. What's the difference between the Messiah? How it's understood in Islam, how it's understood in Judeo-Christian. I have to say Judeo-Christian because it's both. However, my experience of coming out of Louis Massignon's own spiritual understanding and how he understood what he called crossing over to the other. He called it crossing over to the other, in order to thoroughly understand what the spirituality was. What is it for a Muslim? You are talking about eschatology, for example. We also have eschatology in our tradition. But the important thing is to take that theological understanding and enter into it from the actual spiritual experience of Muslim believers or Christian believers, and then share that. And that enhances our own tradition. Okay, so my question for you would be around that understanding of how the theology informs the spirituality, the actual lived experience of Muslims, for example, and Christians, so that they can share that.
Spirituality. That's a very good question. And I think it's so important, as if like the topic of another lecture. because I really, I like this question very much, because I wrote a book called Islamic Spirituality, Theology and Practice for the Modern World. I think spirituality can bring people together greatly. You know, when you pray 5 times a day, you know, you make connection with the divine. A Christian who is, like one of my students said, my mom is praying 7 times a day, 7 times a day. You know?
Okay.
You know that Muslims generally think that Christians don't pray. No, that there are some Christians who are praying 7 times a day. They are opening their hands to God. Islamic prayer has many connotations. One is you open your hands to God and asking something from God. One is you have prescribed prayers. That is, you have to do that. You know, it's not something that if you want it, you have to do it, because He has created you and you are indebted to Him, to God. And therefore you have to pray 5 times a day as a thank you, Allah, that you created me. I am now giving my thanks to you because you created me and you gave me this life, you gave me this body, so I have to thank you. So this such connection connect you to other people as well. For example, you say, this person is the creature of my Lord. This mountain is created by my Lord. So you make brotherhood and sisterhood with the world of nature, with the realm of humanity. And that's why, for example, there is a Quranic verse says, we have created human beings in the most honorable way, in the most honorable format. And I think when people are growing spiritually, they become much more connected and they become much more understanding other people. They find much more values of connections. On my book, Islamic Spirituality, I dedicated one section on Islam and ecology. Islamic spirituality and ecology. You know, if you really have this sense of spirituality, Christian spirituality, Jewish spirituality, Islamic spirituality, you might understand the role of the world of nature better. And in Islam, it is so important. It says every element of nature is praising God. Very clear Quranic verse. How you can, you know, harm that is praising God, you know. And that's why there is very famous story in the mystical tradition of Islam, that one of the masters of Islamic mysticism asks tests his students, his disciples. He thinks to appoint a successor, but he wants to test them first. So he says, I ask each of you to go and bring a bouquet of flowers for me in this evening. And in the morning, everybody goes. In the evening, everybody comes with a beautiful bouquet of flowers, so that they want to be, you know, the successor will be a very high religious position. But one of them comes with empty-handed. With empty hands. And he says, why didn't you bring anything? Everybody brought so beautiful flowers. You didn't bring anything. You just came with empty hands. And he says, Master, whenever I wanted to cut a flower, I heard was praising God. I couldn't cut it. And the master says, I found my successor. That is you. So that was a very beautiful test. So he wanted to know that if they have that conscience of nature, that can hear the voice of nature, And that's actually the realm of spirituality. People, when they grow in spirituality, they will hear this. Even if they don't hear physically, they learn about it, they know about it, and they become much more conscious of the protection of nature. And this will bring safety to humanity, you know, these global warmings or all other problems that we are facing today. So that spirituality is so significant. And I think many of my students, when they read that section of the book, we never thought that, you know, Islam will have so much focusing on the protection of the environment. Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, really very important, spiritually very, very important. Mm-hmm. I hope I answered your question, because it's a very large concept.
Yeah, well, it's a big question. You're right. You need another lecture to really talk about how the theology informs the spirituality. But in fact, you know, you're answering it on the spiritual level, and that is the experience of Muslim believers, Christian believers, Jewish believers, Buddhists, Hindus. You know, everybody is their lived experience of their religion. You know, and the theology is wonderful, and it's, you know, it's enriching, but it also has to come down to the level of how do you experience it, you know, and that's exactly what you're saying. So appreciate very much your answers to the questions and your wonderful lecture and your beautiful book. I highly recommend, if anybody really wants to understand the eschatology and how Jesus is essential to it in Islam, to purchase that book. Okay, so thank you so much.
I had one experience I'd like to share with you. Mm-hmm. I was giving a lecture on this subject, and a person from Saudi Arabia with his wife came to me. I think I was giving a lecture in Arizona. It was organized by University of Arizona, I think. And came to me and he said, you know, doctor, I have been struggling with this question since my high school. And I could not understand how Jesus can come. But now you made me understand how Jesus can come.
It's good.
So I thought that's a very good testimony, you know.
It is. Yeah, it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a lovely evening. I cannot see any of the people who are here, so I hope that there are a lot of people.
I hope people enjoy it.
To listen to you.
Thank you. Take care.
Good to see you. Thank you very much, and please stay well and safe, and pray that this pandemic is over. Okay.
Yeah, we hope that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.